Hey everyone, welcome back, and today I have this bass flute to show you. This one is from Schiller. It's kind of it's a low-end brand. You know, they kind of make the cheaper Chinese stuff, which isn't so great if you're trying to find, you know, a quality like alto sax or, you know, student flute or something. You know, they're not the best instruments, but for some novelty instruments like a bass flute that, at least for me, I would never really play, you know, outside of, you know, maybe if you're in a flute choir, I know that that might be useful, in which case you'd want something better than this. But, you know, for all the other stuff, you know, they've got their super bones and stuff, similar to the one that I've showed off in my other videos. You know, weird stuff like that. It's kind of fun to have and way cheaper to get something like this than it is to get a real one. You know, I would never have gotten a bass flute if I had to get one from a, you know, more well-known brand. So just getting that out of the way. It is from Schiller, so not great. I wouldn't necessarily recommend them for all this stuff, but for, you know, weird, out of the ordinary things like this, it's a great way to get something just to fiddle around with at a low cost. So with that out of the way, let's get to some of the specs of this instrument. So first off, you can see it's got this curved head joint piece here. So this head joint actually does separate and come out from the other piece, so these all move independently of each other, which is not super useful since this part of the head joint doesn't go into the body directly. If you've seen that on some alto flutes, I know they do that, where you have the option to either do a straight head joint, have it out to the side, or use the curve, either one. Although for this, the separation is more just so that you can adjust your position wherever you'd like, rather than, you know, for the functionality of having straight or curved. You have to use it with this curve adapter. And then moving down, you've got all your basic keys. You know, goes just down to low C there, and pretty much what you expect. The keys are a little wider than normal, you know, the key spacings, so I have to kind of stretch across from the C to the A here. But other than that, it's pretty standard, especially the lower keys feel pretty good. Even the pinky keys aren't too far, and I've got little hands, so that shows you just how close they are. It's pretty easy for me to reach, which is nice, because sometimes when you get on larger instruments, you know, this isn't quite as big an instrument as some in the bass range, but when you get to bigger instruments, sometimes they can get a little unwieldy, especially from some lesser known brands. You know, they're not able to dial in the ergonomics and stuff to keep the cost down. But anyway, we also have this hand brace in the back, which is super handy, because usually you'd be resting kind of in the crook of your thumb and your finger here if you're playing a regular flute, but on this, it's so big that you have to wrap your hands around, and if you were to, say, have your hands straight on the body, you'd have to curve your fingers real crazy like that. It'd be real uncomfortable. So it's nice that that's built in right there. It screws off this. It does separate for storage, but yeah, you put that in, rest your hand right on it. Pretty nifty. Other than that, this is in the key of C. You know, just like your regular concert flute, so just an octave below that, which is really neat. It's got a really deep, you know, breathy, woody sound, as you would expect from something like this. When I bought it, I actually thought it was an alto flute. That's what it was advertised as, and so when I got it, I was like, huh, this looks a little bit big, but I, you know, hadn't seen many alto flutes, you know, maybe one or two, so, and certainly no bass flutes, you know, in person. So I was like, well, maybe it's, you know, maybe it's just a funny looking alto flute because it's from a weird company. And as I was putting it together, I ended up repadding it with Bassoon Pads. I started out with, since they're a little bit thinner, they fit in the key cups, and it's really hard to find alto and bass flute pads. You know, they're not only expensive, but hard to find. So I tried some, and they didn't quite fit. I was like, you know what, I'm not going to bother with all those pads trying to find the right one. You know, I'm not going to be able to order some for something like this. I'm not going to spend a whole, you know, hundreds and hundreds of dollars doing that. And so my boss recommended putting in bassoon pads or saxophone pads. You know, saxophone pads are a little bit thicker, so sometimes they don't work, but in this case, they did work, and it was in that process of me saying, hey, I think these bassoon pads are almost too thin. That's odd. He's saying the same thing. He's going, well, I've done, at least 1 or 2 bass flutes or alto flutes, and, usually the bassoon pads work. And he goes, are you sure that's an alto flute? Looks a little big. So that was funny because we played it. Sure enough, it comes out in the key of C. Alto flutes are in the key of G. And we both go, oh goodness, how silly, So I felt kind of silly messing around with this whole thing, pretty much setting it up like an alto flute, and it was a bass flute. So kind of just a funny little story there. But in the end, got it all fixed and working, and it plays fairly well. And the low end, of course, takes a lot of air, as you can expect. Regular flute takes a lot of air, and so this thing just having more tubing definitely takes a lot more, especially since with flute, a lot of your energy or your air is kind of lost going out over top of the mouth pipe opening. So it does take a lot of air, but it sounds great. I'll play some examples for you in a second, but the mid-range is really difficult. I know that's kind of with all lower end instruments. That's like a huge thing on bari sax. Middle D is always sounding really stuffy and sounds really weird. That's just a thing on a lot of lower instruments, that the mid ranges can be a little bit difficult. And especially on this, I have a feeling it's just because it's a lower quality production. It's just not quite as dialed in maybe as it could be. But yeah, range from middle D up to about G is really, really hard to get to speak, which I find kind of interesting. So I'll do my best to play it, but full disclosure, I am not a flute player, far from it. I just know the basics of playing, mostly just to play test them in the shop. So I will do my best to play a couple pieces and give you guys an idea of what it sounds like. So other than that, thanks for watching.